All right, here's the very end of our book. The little evening breeze blew over the clearing, and the leaves rustled and the wind waves flowed up the green pool. And the shouts of men sounded again, this time much closer than before. George took off his hat. He said, shakily, "Take off your hat, Lenny. The air feels fine." Lenny removed his hat dutifully and laid it on the ground in front of him. The shadow in the valley was bluer, and the evening came fast. On the wind, the sound of crashing in the brush came to them. Lenny said, "Tell how it's going to be." George had been listening to the distant sounds. For a moment, he was businesslike. "Look across the river, Lenny, and I'll tell you. You can almost see it." Lenny turned his head and looked off across the pool, up the darkening slopes of the Gallopans. "We got to get a little place," George began. He reached in his side pocket and brought out Carlson's Luger. He snapped off the safety, and the hand and gun lay on the ground behind Lenny's back. He looked at the back of Lenny's head, at the place where the spine and skull were joined. A man's voice called from up the river, and another man answered. "Go on," said Lenny. George raised the gun and his hand shook, and he dropped his hand to the ground again. "Go on," said Lenny. "How's it going to be? We're going to get a little place." "We'll have a cow," said George, "and we'll maybe have a pig and chickens, and down the flat we'll have a little piece of alfalfa." "For the rabbits," Lenny shouted. "For the rabbits," George repeated. "And I get to tend the rabbits, and you get to tend the rabbits." Lenny giggled with happiness. "And live on the fat of the land." "Yes." Lenny turned his head. "No, Lenny, look down there, across the river. You can almost see the place." Lenny obeyed him. George looked down at the gun. There were crashing footsteps in the brush now. George turned and looked toward them. "Go on, George. When are we going to do it?" "Gonna do it soon. Me and you. You and me. Everybody's going to be nice to you. You ain't going to be in no more trouble. Nobody going to hurt nobody nor steal from them." Lenny said, "I thought you was mad at me, George." "No," George said. "No, Lenny, I ain't mad. I never been mad, and I ain't now. And there's the thing I want to tell you." The voices came close now. George raised the gun and listened to the voices. Lenny begged, "Let's do it now. Let's get that place now." "Sure, right now. I gotta. We gotta." And George raised the gun and steadied it, and he brought the muzzle of it close to the back of Lenny's head. The hand shook violently, but his face set, and his hand steadied. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lenny jarred, and then settled slowly forward to the sand, and he lay without quivering. George shivered and looked at the gun, and then he threw it from him, back up on the bank near the pile of old ashes. The brush seemed filled with cries, and with the sound of running feet, Slim's voice shouted, "George! Where you at, George?" But George sat stiffly on the bank and looked at his right hand that had thrown the gun away. The group burst into the clearing, and Curly was ahead. He saw Lenny lying on the sand. "Got him!" He went over and looked down at Lenny, and then he looked back at George. "Right in the back of the head," he said softly. Slim came directly to George and sat down beside him, sat very close to him. "Never you mind," said Slim. "A guy got to sometimes." But Carlson was standing over George. "How'd you do it?" he asked. "I just done it," George said, tiredly. "Did he have my gun?" "Yeah, he had your gun." "And you got it away from him? And you took it? And you killed him?" "Yeah, that's how." George's voice was almost a whisper. He looked steadily at his right hand that had held the gun. Slim twitched George's elbow. "Come on, George. Me and you will go in and get a drink." George let himself be helped to his feet. "Yeah, a drink." Slim said, "You had to, George. I swear, you had to. Come on with me." He led George into the entrance of the trail and up toward the highway. Curly and Carlson looked after them, and Carlson said, "Now, what the hell do you suppose is eating them two guys up?" The end.